Hi, this is Eric Michael Loyd, a Master's in Psychology, Neuropsychology concentration. I want to read an article by Plos One. This one is called To Be Funny or Not to Be Funny, Gender Differences in Student Perceptions of Instructor Humor in College Science Courses. This one is written by a number of researchers: Caitlin M. Cooper, Taisha Hendricks, Michelle D. Stevens, Jacqueline M. Callie Murrer, Anna Craig, Ashley C. M. Agluro, Giovanni V. Badini, M. Elizabeth Barnes, Bradley Alledge, Roxanne Jones, Edmund C. Lemon, Nicholas C. Massimo, and several others, Sarah E. Brownell. Review all the articles there, all the authors there as well. This one was published August 15th, 2018. It has the DOI there as well as 10.1371 / journal.pone, PONE .0201258. Abstract. For over 50 years, instructor humor has been recognized as a way to positively impact student cognitive and affective learning. However, no study has explored humor exclusively in the context of college science courses, which have the reputation of being difficult and boring. The majority of studies that explore humor have assumed that students perceive instructor humor to be funny, yet students likely perceive some instructor humor as unfunny or offensive. Further evidence suggests that women perceive certain subjects to be more offensive than men, yet we do not know what impact this may have on the experience of women in the classroom. To address these gaps in literature, we surveyed students across 25 different college science courses about their perceptions of instructor humor in college science classes, which yielded 1,637 student responses. Open coding methods were used to analyze student responses to a question about why students appreciate humor. Multinomial regression was used to identify whether there are gender differences in the extent to which funny, unfunny, and offensive humor influence student attention to course content, instructor relatability, and student sense of belonging. Logistic regression was used to examine gender differences in what subjects students find funny and offensive when joked about by college science instructors. Nearly 99% of students reported that they appreciate instructor humor and reported that it positively changes the classroom atmosphere, improves student experience during class, and enhances the student-instructor relationship. We found that funny humor tends to increase student attention to course content, instructor relatability, and student sense of belonging. Conversely, offensive humor tends to decrease instructor relatability and student sense of belonging. Lastly, we identified subjects that males were more likely to find funny and females were more likely to find offensive if a college science instructor were to joke about them. As the citations there, editors, when it was received, copyright, data availability, funding, and competing interests. Introduction. Students often perceive science courses to be difficult, competitive, and boring, and science instructors have been stereotyped as dull and described as unapproachable. Although these perceptions can be difficult to alter, one classroom practice that has the potential to positively change undergraduates' perceptions of science instructors and science classrooms is instructor use of humor. Humor is commonly defined as the quality of being amusing or funny. Although humor is subjective and it is often difficult to describe why something is funny, the research literature on humor suggests that what is often humorous is what is unexpected from the norm. People use humor for many different reasons. Humor can be used to increase group cohesion, to relieve stress, or to assert superiority. College instructors have been shown to regularly use humor during class. One study that sampled 70 college courses across different academic disciplines found that 80% of instructors used humor at least once during a randomly selected 50-minute lecture. For over 50 years, instructor humor has been recognized as a way to positively impact student cognitive and affective learning. For example, studies have shown that humor in the college classroom is positively related to student sense of community in the classroom, student attention during class, student comfort asking questions of the instructor, student participation in class, and student motivation to attend class. Further, students self-report that humor improves their learning, although research results conflict about whether humor actually enhances student learning. Some studies have found no relationship between humor and student learning, while other studies have found humor has a positive effect on student learning. Notably, to our knowledge, no studies have explored the benefits of instructor humor specifically in the context of college science courses, which are often perceived as difficult and competitive. The majority of studies that explore the effect of instructor humor on students have assumed that students perceived the humor to be funny, yet it is likely that students experience instructor humor that they perceive as unfunny or may even consider to be offensive. In fact, one study surveyed 124 students across three college classes about instructor use of humor, and when students were asked to report possible problems with using humor in class, 32% of students identified that humor has the potential to be offensive. Further, students in an introductory communications course generated 513 examples of instructor humor that they considered to be inappropriate, many of which were disparaging to students. Even though there is evidence for what students perceive to be offensive or inappropriate forms of humor, to our knowledge, no studies have explored how instructor use of offensive humor may influence students' experiences in the science classroom. Further, there is some evidence that female students perceive certain subjects to be more offensive than male students do. Studies have shown that female students are less tolerant of jokes about male or female stereotypes that are crude or profane, and female students are less likely than male students to enjoy sexual humor. We do not know if women are more offended by topics or jokes that may be used by instructors in college science classrooms, nor do we know what impact offensive humor may have on the experience of women in science classes. We do know, however, that undergraduate women in college science courses have reported lower sense of belonging, lower confidence, lower perception of their academic abilities compared to their male counterparts. Further, evidence suggests that women may be less engaged in science classes. Specifically, studies show that as compared to males, females have lower preference for being a leader in a small group discussion and do not participate as much in whole class discussion in college college science courses. Studies have also shown that female science, technology, engineering, and math (STEM) majors report significantly lower respect and recognition from STEM instructors and are less likely to perceive that instructors know their name. Notably, many of these gender disparities have been found across undergraduate science courses, even in disciplines such as biology, where women make up 60% of the undergraduate majors. Could instructor use of humor be a factor negatively affecting the experience of women in college science courses? In this manuscript, we set out to explore student perceptions of instructor use of humor in college science classrooms and whether there are any gender differences in how students perceive and are affected by instructor use of humor. The specific research questions of each study are as follows. Study 1. To what extent do students appreciate when instructors use humor in college science classes? Why do students appreciate when instructors use humor in college science classes? Study 2. How do instructors' use of funny humor, unfunny humor, and offensive humor in college science courses affect student attention to course content, instructor relatability, and student sense of belonging into the course? Are there gender differences in the extent to which students report being affected by funny, unfunny, and offensive humor? Study 3. When instructors' use of humor in college science classes, what potentially humorous subjects are students likely to find funny? What potentially humorous subjects are students likely to find offensive? Are there potentially humorous subjects that male or female students are more likely to find funny or offensive? Method and results. This study was done with an approved Arizona State University Institutional Review Board protocol number 00005725. This research project was conducted as part of a biology education course-based research experience (CRE) taught by KMC, MEB, and SEB in the spring semester of 2017. A CRE is a course where students engage in novel, broadly relevant research. This course was backward designed with the goal of teaching students about biology education research by exploring a research question that could result in publication. 16 students were enrolled in the semester long 3-unit course. The instructors of the course and the student researchers collectively were responsible for developing the research questions, collecting data, analyzing data, interpreting data, and communicating the findings. See Cooper and Brownell under review for a more detailed description of the structure and organization of this CRE. Humor survey development and distribution. No previously developed survey existed to explore student perceptions of instructor use of humor in college science classrooms. So we designed a survey based on our specific research questions and the prior literature. We iteratively reviewed and modified the survey questions using a set of criteria that we developed to assess the appropriateness of each question. Is the question grammatically correct? Is the meaning and interpretation of the question clear? Are the question answer choices unambiguous in meaning? 17 researchers reviewed the study and evaluated the appropriateness of survey questions based on the criteria. The researchers provided written feedback about each question, and the survey was revisited. Next, 3 of the researchers, G, V, B, E, A, W, R, J, conducted a series of think aloud interviews with a total of 8 undergraduate biology students to establish cognitive validity of the humor survey by ensuring that students understood what each question was asking. The survey was iteratively revised after each Think Aloud interview. 17 of the researchers completed the revised humor survey and again evaluated each question using the criteria for assessing survey questions. Once again, the survey was revisited based on their feedback. Finally, the humor survey was piloted with 1 biology education postdoc, 3 biology education graduate students, and 3 undergraduate biology students, none of whom were involved with the project. The study was revisited a final time based on their feedback. Thus, the humor survey was iteratively revised a total of 11 times with 49 instances of individual feedback. Please see the supplemental information S1 file for questions from the final humor survey. Data were collected from a large Research One institution in the southwest United States. We recruited instructors to deploy the survey in their science classes. Instructors offered students a small amount of extra credit for completing the 15-minute survey. In cases where an instructor was not able to offer extra credit, students were offered a chance to win a $200 gift card for completing the survey. The survey was deployed using the online platform Qualtrics in 25 different undergraduate science classes, including courses in biology, chemistry, physics, and environmental science. Once instructors deployed the survey, students were given approximately 1 week to complete it. The Institutional Review Board at The institution where this study was conducted requires that students consent at the beginning of the survey to have their data used for research purposes. Once all data were collected, student names were immediately removed from the survey responses and replaced with random identifiers. Two researchers, JMC and KM, cleaned the data by removing all entries from students who did not consent to participate in the study and from students who did not finish completing the survey. The researchers also deleted any duplicate responses from students who completed the survey more than once, leaving a complete set of 1,637 student responses. Demographics of the students who consented to having their data included in the study are shown in Table 1. The study was conducted at an institution in the United States, and we recognize that humor is highly dependent on the culture, and thus these findings may be translatable to non-Western cultures. Study 1. To what extent do students appreciate when instructors use humor in college science classes? Why do students appreciate when instructors use humor in college science classes? Study 1 methods. To determine the extent to which students appreciate when instructors use humor in science classes, we analyze the survey question. Please indicate the degree to which you agree with the following statement. I appreciate when instructors use humor in college science classrooms, which students answered using a 6-point Likert scale ranging from strongly disagree to 6 strongly agree. We designed a 6-point Likert scale because we wanted to know whether students either agreed or disagreed with the statement, and our Think Aloud interviews indicated that the students were not neutral or ambivalent about the extent to which they appreciated instructor humor. Students who strongly agreed or agreed that they appreciate when instructors use humor in college science classrooms were asked to explain their reasoning for why they appreciate when instructors use humor in college science classrooms. For researchers, TH, ECL, AK, and TR reviewed student responses to this open-ended question using inductive coding. We probed why students appreciate instructors' use of humor in undergraduate science courses without a specific hypothesis in mind because the question has never been explored in the context of undergraduate science courses. Thus, we did not want to bias our findings, and we let themes emerge from the data. Together, the researchers analyzed a subset of 500 student responses and developed a rubric to describe the most apparent themes. Two researchers, KMC and SEB, reviewed the rubric and 200 student responses to ensure that the rubric was representative of the most apparent themes. Then, using the rubric, the four researchers, TH, ECL, AK, and TR, individually analyzed 200 student responses using constant comparison methods. They assigned each quote to a theme and constantly compared quotes to each other to ensure that each quote fit within the description of the theme that was assigned to, and to ensure that the quotes were not different enough to warrant another category. A single student's response could consist of multiple quotes. After individually coding 200 responses, the researchers compared codes and revised the rubric. This process was repeated until there was a consensus estimate of at least 70% among all four researchers. Once reaching a consensus estimate of 70%, the four researchers individually used the rubric to code every student response. Finally, the researchers compared their codes for every student response and came to consensus when they disagreed. See supporting information S2 file for a copy of the coding rubric. Study 1 results. The majority of students strongly agreed. 63.7% agreed. 31.5% or slightly strongly agreed. The majority of students strongly agreed. 63.7% agreed. 31.5% or slightly agreed. 3.7%. With the statement, I appreciate when instructors use humor in college science classrooms. Very few students strongly disagreed. 0.4% 0.4%, disagreed 0.2%, or slightly disagreed 0.5% with the statement. Collapsing the data, 98.8% of students agreed and only 1.2% of students disagreed that they appreciate when instructors use humor in college science classrooms. Only 1.2% disagreed. Students who strongly agreed or agreed that they appreciate when instructors use humor in college science classrooms were asked why they appreciate when instructors use humor. The inductive coding analysis generated 9 themes. Of the 1,557 students who strongly agreed or agreed that they appreciated humor, 1,541 students provided a response to the question, and 1,475 of the responses, 94.7%, were able to be coded. The 9 themes were grouped into 3 larger categories. Humor positively changes the classroom environment. 2. Humor improves students' experience in class. And 3. Humor enhances the relationship between students and the instructor. Students were able to write as much as they wanted in response to this question, and 1,139 students, 77.2% of students who provided responses that could be coded, reported more than one reason for why they appreciate when instructors use humor in college science classrooms. The average number of reasons that a student reported was 1.62. The percent of responses that fell into a particular category was calculated by dividing the number of responses by the number of students who provided a response that could be coded, n is equal to 1,475. Students reported they appreciate when instructors use humor in college science classes because it positively changes the classroom atmosphere. Table 2. Specifically, 49.4% of students appreciate science instructors' use of humor because it makes class more interesting, fun, or exciting and makes the class feel less boring. Students, 21.8%, also described science classes can feel dark or heavy when science instructors use humor. Can feel dark or heavy, and when science instructors use humor, it lightens the mood of the class and creates a more comfortable and inviting environment. Further, students, 7.8%, acknowledge that science content can be difficult, and when instructors use humor, it gives students a break from the hard content and allows for more time to process difficult information. Students also highlighted that humor improves students' experience during class. For example, 26.5% of students described that when science instructors use humor, it can cause students to pay more attention in class or to be more engaged with the material, and 21.4% of students perceive that humor helps them retain science content and can even enhance their learning. Additionally, students, 8.5%, described that science classrooms can cause them to feel stressed or anxious, but instructor use of humor can reduce students' stress-related emotions about the class. The final overarching category that emerged from the data was that instructor use of humor can enhance the relationship between the instructor and the student. Students, 13.3%, described that when science instructors use humor, it makes the instructor more personable or relatable and helps students realize that the instructor is a real person. In fact, some students, 7.6%, perceive that when instructors use humor, they appear more approachable and students are more likely to go to them for help or advice. Lastly, students, 5.5%, perceived that science instructors' use of humor can go beyond making instructors seem more personable and approachable and help build a relationship between instructors and students. Study 1 conclusion. Nearly all of the students, 98.8%, appreciate when instructors use humor in college science classrooms. Students appreciate science instructors' use of humor because it positively changes the classroom atmosphere, improves students' experience in class, and enhances the relationship between students and instructor. Study 2. How do instructors' use of funny humor, unfunny humor, and offensive humor in college science courses affect student attention to course content, instructor relatability, and student sense of belonging to the course? Are there gender differences in the extent to which students report being affected by funny, unfunny, or offensive humor? In general, the use of humor has been shown to positively impact students. However, while instructors likely intend for students to find their humor funny, instructors' use of humor in college science classrooms may not be perceived by all students as funny, and some humor may even be perceived by students as offensive. Yet, no prior study has explored how instructor humor that students perceive to be funny, unfunny, or offensive affects students in science courses. Thus, we are interested in exploring the impact of funny, unfunny, offensive humor on student experiences in class. Further, we tested whether there were gender differences in the extent to which funny, unfunny, and offensive humor impacts student attention to course content, instructor relatability, student sense of belonging to the science course. We acknowledge that gender identity is not binary, male, female, and recognize that some students identify with non binary gender identities. Unfortunately, there were too few students who identified as non binary to include them in the gender analysis in the study. Study 2's methods. On the humor survey, students were asked to provide an example of a time that an instructor used humor in a college science course and that they thought it was funny, and was equal to 1,637 participants. Then students were asked how their example of the instructor's use of funny humor affected their attention to the course content, which they answered on a 5-point Likert scale. 1. It made me pay a lot less attention to the course content. 2. It made me pay a little less attention to the course content. 3. It did not affect my attention to the course content. 4. It made me pay a little bit more attention to the course content, a little more attention to the course content. 5. It made me pay a lot more attention to the course content. Students were also asked how their example of the instructor's use of funny humor influenced instructor relatability, which they answered on a 5-point Likert scale. 1. It made the instructor a lot less relatable. 2. It made the instructor a little less relatable. 3. It did not affect how relatable the instructor was to me. 4. It made the instructor a little more relatable. 5. It made the instructor a lot more relatable. Finally, the students were asked how their example of the instructor's funny use of humor affected their sense of belonging to their science class, which they answered using a 5-point Likert scale. 1. It made me feel like I belonged to the class. 2. It made me feel like I belonged to the class a little less. 3. It did not affect my sense of belonging to the class. 4. It made me feel like I belonged to the class a little more. 5. It made me feel like I belonged to the class a lot more. We designed a 5-point Likert scale to measure the constructs and included a neutral choice. It did not affect my attention to the course content because we expected that some humor may not affect a student's behavior or feelings during class, and we piloted these questions during Think Aloud interviews. We found this to be true. Next, students were asked to provide an example of a time that an instructor used humor in college science courses and they did not find it funny. After students provided that example they did not find was funny, they were asked whether they perceived the example of instructor humor as offensive. 1,411 students provided an unfunny example that they did not perceive as offensive, unfunny humor, and 159 students provided an unfunny example that they perceived as offensive humor. Then, using the same format of questions described above, students were asked to report how the example of an instructor's use of humor that they did not find funny affected their attention to course content, instructor relatability, and their sense of belonging to the class. We used a multinomial logistic regression to determine whether there were gender differences in the extent to which students reported that funny, unfunny, and offensive humor affected their attention to the course content, instructor relatability, and sense of belonging to the course. Multinomial logistic regression is an approach for modeling the relationship between more than two categorically distributed dependent variables. In this case, whether a student reported that a type of humor had a positive impact, no impact, or a negative impact on an outcome variable. Student attention to course content, instructor relatability, and sense of belonging to the class, and predictor variables, in this case, student gender. For each type of instructor humor, funny, unfunny, and offensive, we ran multinomial models to explore the effect of that particular type of instructor humor on students' reported attention to course content, instructor relatability, and sense of belonging to the class, respectively. Each multinomial model consists of a set of two independent binary logistic regression models. We provide the results of each regression by listing the focus category followed by the reference category and the respective p-value. Example, focus category, reference category, p-value. There are several ways to interpret model coefficients from logistic regression. The most accessible way is to interpret the natural exponential of the estimated coefficient, which is the factor of change in odds that females compared to males will report that humor affected them in a particular way, did not affect their sense of belonging versus increased their sense of belonging, also referred to as odds ratio. The odds ratio can be considered a standardized effect size statistic because the explanatory variable gender is binary. Study 2 results. Attention to course content. We found that the majority of students reported an instructor's use of funny humor caused them to pay either a little more, 39.0%, or a lot more, 49.2% attention to course content. For 11.1% of students, an instructor's use of funny humor did not affect their attention to course content, and for less than 1% of students, it caused them to pay more attention to the course, pay attention to the course content less. So, 39.0% or a lot more, 49.2% attention to the course content. So, more attention, 39%, 49 to 49, or a lot more attention, up to 50% almost. 11% of students, an instructor's use of funny humor did not affect their attention to the course content, and for less than 1% of students, it caused them to pay attention to course content less. Females were not significantly more likely than males to report that funny humor makes them pay more attention to course content, more attention, less attention, p-value 0.85, 85% confidence interval, more attention, no effect, p-value is 0.23. All model coefficients, z-values, p-values, and significant odds ratios are listed in Table 3. That's Figure 2 there, Table 3. The majority of students, 74.8%, reported that the majority of students, 74.8% reported that an instructor's use of funny humor did not affect their attention to course content. However, for nearly 16% of students, an instructor's use of unfunny humor caused them to pay a little less, 11.4%, or a lot less, 4.1% attention to content. For some students, even though they found an instructor's use of humor unfunny, it still caused them to pay attention to the content either a little more, 7.1%, or a lot more, 2.7%. Females were 1.6 times more likely than males to report that unfunny humor had no effect on their attention compared to reporting that it made them pay more attention. No effect or more attention. P-value was 0.0007, less than 1%. However, there was no significant gender difference in the extent to which students reported that unfunny humor had no effect on their attention when compared to causing them to pay attention less. So no effect, slash less attention. P-value is 0.15. For many students, if the instructor's use of humor was offensive to them, it negatively influenced their attention to course content, as 23.3% of students described that an instructor's use of offensive humor caused them to pay attention to course content a little less than 20.8% of students described that it caused them to pay attention a lot less. For 45.3% of students, the instructor's use of offensive humor did not affect their attention to course content. There were some students who, despite finding the instructor's use of humor offensive, reported that it made them pay attention to course content either a little more, 8.2%, or a lot more, 2.5%. Females were no more or less likely than males to report that offensive humor had no effect on their attention to course content. No effect, less attention, p-value is 0.84. No effect, more attention, p-value is 0.71. Instructor relatability. On average, an instructor's use of funny humor in college science classes increased instructor relatability for students. The majority of students reported that an instructor's use of funny humor made the instructor either a little more relatable, 36.2%, or a lot more relatable, 53.7%, while 9.5% of students reported that instructors' use of funny humor did not affect how relatable the instructor was to the student. Only 0.5% of students reported that it made the instructor less relatable to them. Figure 2b. Females were not significantly more likely than males to report that funny humor makes the instructor more relatable. More relatable, no effect. P-value is 0.19. More relatable, less relatable, 0.29. For most students, 67.5%, an instructor's use of unfunny humor did not affect how relatable the instructor of the course was to them. However, some students reported that an instructor's use of funny humor made the instructor a little less relatable, 14.9%, or a lot less relatable, 6.7%. Interestingly, 10% of students reported that even when they did not find an instructor's use of humor funny, it still made the instructor seem a little more relatable, 7.0%, or a lot more relatable, 3.8%. Females were 2.3 times more likely than males to report that unfunny humor had no effect on the instructor's relatability compared to a positive impact, no effect, more relatable. P-value is 0.001. However, there was no significant gender difference in the extent to which students reported that unfunny humor had no effect on instructor relatability compared to a negative impact, no effect, less relatable. P-value is 0.06. If the instructor's use of unfunny humor was offensive, the majority of students reported that it made the instructor a little less, 30.8%, or a lot less, 47.2%, relatable. For 18.2% of students, the instructor's offensive humor did not affect how relatable the instructor was for the student, and a minority of students, 3.8%, reported that although they perceived the instructor's humor as offensive, it made the instructor more relatable to the student. Figure 2b. Females were 15.2 times more likely than males to report that offensive humor made the instructor of the course less relatable compared to more relatable. Less relatable, more relatable. P-value is 0.02. However, there was no significant gender difference in the extent to which students reported that offensive humor made the instructor of the course less relatable compared to having no effect on instructor relatability. Less relatable, no effect. P-value is 0.20. Sense of belonging. We were also interested to see how instructor use of humor affects students' sense of belonging to the course. On average, instructors using funny humor increased students' sense of belonging to their science class. Instructor use of funny humor increased most students' sense of belonging to the course a little more, 37.8%, or a lot more, 42.2%. For 19.8% of students, the instructor's use of funny humor did not affect their sense of belonging, and only 0.2% of students reported that the funny example caused them to feel as though they belonged to the class. Figure 2C. Females were not significantly more likely than males to report that funny humor makes them feel as though they belong more to the class. Belong more or no effect, p-value is 0.50, belong more or belong less, p-value is 0.77. On average, science instructors' use of unfunny humor did not seem to influence students' sense of belonging to their science class. The majority of students, 81.4%, reported that instructors' use of unfunny humor did not affect their sense of belonging. There was no clear trend for how instructors' use of unfunny humor affected the remaining students. Less than 10% of students reported that an instructor's use of unfunny humor caused them to feel like they belonged to the class a little more, 3.9%, and a lot more, 4.6%, and approximately 10% of students reported that the instructor's use of unfunny humor caused them to feel like they belonged to the class a little less, 7.3%, or a lot less, 2.9%. Figure 2C. Females were 2.7 times more likely than males to report that unfunny instructor humor has no effect on their belonging compared to a positive impact, no effect. Belonging p-value is less than 0.001. However, females were 1.5 times less likely than males to report that unfunny humor has no effect on their belonging compared to a negative impact, no effect. Belong less, p-value is 0.04. When students perceived the instructor's use of unfunny humor to be offensive, it was more likely to negatively affect their sense of belonging, while 23.9% of students reported that instructors' use of offensive humor did not affect their sense of belonging to the course. 35.8% of students reported that it made them feel like they belonged to the class a little less, and 35.8% students reported that it made them feel like they belonged to the class a lot less. Figure 2C. Females were 8.8 times more likely than males to report that offensive humor caused them to feel as though they belonged less to the course compared to reporting that offensive humor made them feel as though they belong more to the course. Belong less, belong more. P-value is equal to 0.01. However, there was no significant gender difference in the extent to which students reported that offensive humor made them feel as though they belonged less to the course when compared to reporting that offensive humor had no effect on their sense of belonging. Belong less, no effect, 0.7. P-value is 0.77. Study two's conclusion and study two's methods, results, and discussion I will go over in the next video. I don't want to make this video too long, but again, thank you for your time.